It's time to take things to the next level in Ukraine. Time for the US and other Western nations to hit Russia hard, sending more aid than ever before into Ukraine in order to escalate the conflict and perhaps at last bring it to an end. That's according to retired US Army General David Petraeus. And when a man like David Petraeus speaks, the military world tends to listen. Born in 1952, Petraeus enrolled at the United States Military Academy in West Point after finishing high school. He went on to enjoy a long and illustrious career in the military, serving a grand total of 37 years in the US Army. During those near 4 decades of active service, Petraeus rose up the ranks, eventually becoming commander of the International Security Assistance Force and commander of US Forces Afghanistan. He also served as the commanding general of the multinational force Iraq, leading all coalition forces during parts of the Iraq War. Upon leaving the army, he went on to become the 4th director of the Central Intelligence Agency. While he may be retired these days, Petraeus is still active. He teaches at universities around the world and keeps a close eye on geopolitical events, sharing the wisdom of his experience in media interviews and articles. He's been a loud and critical voice of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine ever since the war began. In July 2022, he teamed up with 3 other former military generals to form the Strategic Advisory Council for the Defense of Ukraine, with the mission of providing expert guidance and strategic insights to Ukraine's armed forces. Since then, he's spoken out against Russia on numerous occasions. He's criticised not just the country's alleged motives for invading, but also its tactics and the overall standards set by its military leaders and forces. In 2023, when asked if Russia was struggling to achieve its objectives due to failures in intelligence, conscripts or military culture, he issued a damning response. All of the above and more. The list is long, including poor campaign design, wholly inadequate training. What were they doing for all those months they were deployed on the northern, eastern and southern borders of Ukraine? Poor command, control and communications, inadequate discipline and a culture that condones war crimes and abuse of local populations. Poor equipment, exemplified by turrets blowing off of tanks when fires ignite in them. Insufficient logistic capabilities, inability to achieve combined arms effects, to employ all ground and air capabilities effectively together. Inadequate organisational architecture, lack of a professional non-commissioned officer corps, a top-down command system that doesn't promote initiative at lower levels, and pervasive corruption that undermines every aspect of their military, and the supporting military-industrial complex. Petraeus has also criticised Russia's reliance on brute force tactics and overwhelming artillery strikes, suggesting that the country's military has been particularly wasteful, valuing volume over accuracy and blowing entire towns and villages to pieces purely so they could capture small, inconsequential patches of land. Conversely, he's repeatedly praised Ukraine's valiant defenders for their remarkable ability to dig in and fend off a much larger force while launching successful counterattacks of their own. Petraeus has also been one of the most vocal proponents of ongoing aid to Ukraine. He's continuously urged NATO nations to play their part and continue sending weapons and munitions to Kyiv, as he understands how important this is. In a 2022 interview with CNN, for example, Petraeus noted how Russia had been forced to relocate their headquarters and fuel supplies in response to the US and UK supplying high-mobility rocket systems to Ukraine. This, he said, had a huge impact in terms of slowing Russian advances in Ukraine, adding that Western support had also given Ukrainian soldiers the opportunity to improve their counter-offensives and retake certain territories too. In the years since then, Petraeus has time and again called on the US and its NATO allies to send more valuable, game-changing weaponry to Ukraine like Patriot missile systems. Now, he wants the alliance to go even further and hit Russia harder than ever before. On Monday, July 28, at a Hudson Institute event in Washington, D.C., Petraeus stated that a ceasefire in this war will not happen until Ukraine is strong enough to shift the battlefield dynamic and stop Russian advances once and for all. For that, Petraeus argues, Ukraine needs even more assistance from its Western allies.
I don't foresee a ceasefire deal between Russia and Ukraine until the US, European, and other Western countries provide so much assistance to Ukraine that they can change the dynamic on the battlefield.
In other words, the former general wants to see Ukraine not merely being able to fend off Russian attacks and launch counters of its own here and there, like its recent recapture of Kindrativka. He instead wants the Ukrainian armed forces to be strong enough to stop the Russians from taking any more land, and perhaps even to push them back bit by bit, undoing all of their efforts over the last few years in regions like Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia. That, for Petraeus, is the only thing that will make Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, at last accept that this invasion was a massive mistake and finally bring it to an end. This ties in with previous comments from the former CIA boss, who has repeatedly said the only way to stop the war is by essentially making it impossible for Putin to win. Back in 2023, he was asked how he thought the war would end, stating, "I think it ends in a negotiated resolution. When Putin recognizes that the war is unsustainable on both the battlefield, where Russia has in the first year likely taken many times the losses that the USSR took in nearly a decade in Afghanistan, and on the home front, which has been heavily impacted by economic, financial and personal sanctions and export controls." That point appears closer today than it did in 2023, when Petraeus made those comments. Russia has suffered colossal losses in the intervening years, with more than 1 million casualties. It's also lost vast amounts of military equipment, from tanks and armoured vehicles to air defence systems, radar stations and aircraft. The country is also facing a potentially prolonged period of economic hardship, brought on by Western sanctions and the enormous cost of the war, combined with a dramatic labour shortage and other crises, almost all of which are directly connected to the conflict. Yet, still the war continues. This, in Petraeus' view, is a sign of how desperate and committed Putin is to this invasion, and how even huge loss of life of his own people isn't enough to change his mind. He noted how Russia has now suffered more than 1 million casualties, with 500,000 of the wounded said to be unable to return to the front lines.
That's the kind of cost he's been willing to bear. So you'd have to do something very dramatic. You have to stop them cold on the battlefield.
Petraeus is no stranger to conflicts involving large loss of life. During his speech at the Hudson Institute, he recalled having to write condolence letters to the families of fallen soldiers, admitting that he had trouble understanding the scale of the losses in Ukraine. He believes that the war has been so devastating for the Russian forces that it may even have made some of the country's commanders and most experienced military minds lose their minds, to an extent. He cited the example of Yevgeny Prigozhin, the late leader of the infamous Wagner mercenary group. Prigozhin was once one of Putin's closest confidants and supporters, as well as one of the most powerful people in Russia, controlling a large network of companies with close ties to the Russian Defense Ministry and intelligence services. During the early stages of the war, Prigozhin was one of the key figures leading the charge towards Kyiv. But over time, as the Russian invasion flailed and faltered, and the Wagner group suffered tens of thousands of casualties, the mercenary boss eventually turned on Putin and led a short-lived rebellion against Moscow, before dying in a suspicious plane crash a short while later. Petraeus wonders if the mercenary boss may have become somewhat crazed after seeing so many of the men under his command die. It's certainly possible, and it's likely that other Russian commanders, as well as officers and soldiers of all ranks and levels, have suffered similar breakdowns after witnessing the loss of countless brothers in arms. The former general went on to discuss Putin's demands for a peace deal, which include the removal and replacement of Ukraine's current president, Volodymyr Zelensky, the demilitarization of Ukraine, and a complete ban on potential NATO membership for Ukraine in the future.
That is obviously unacceptable to President Zelensky and really to the Ukrainian people.
They're another sign that Putin isn't really serious about negotiating an end to the war at the moment, because as long as his country is making gains, no matter how small and slow they might be, then he wants to keep going. He wants to expand his sphere of power and influence, grow Russia's territory 1 square mile at a time, and weaken Ukraine bit by bit. And it doesn't matter how many of his countrymen die or get injured in the process, or how many Russian parents, spouses and children are left to mourn the loss of their loved ones. As long as there's some sort of progress, Putin won't stop. That's how ruthless he is and how little he cares about the plight of his people. Petraeus emphasized this in his speech.
And so to do what's necessary to enable Ukraine to stop them cold, perhaps even push them back a bit, that's the way to set the conditions for where Putin might finally be willing to sit down at a table and consider something that is realistic.
That, however, would require even more financial and military aid packages sent to Ukraine from countries like the US, the UK, France, Germany, and so on. These nations and others across the NATO alliance have already supported Ukraine heavily since the war began. The US, for example, has so far spent around $175 billion, with close to $130 billion going directly to the government of Ukraine in the form of weapons, equipment, budget support and humanitarian aid. The European Union, meanwhile, has provided around $180 billion worth of financial, military, humanitarian and refugee assistance in the form of both grants and loans. And NATO nations are continuing to up the ante. Earlier this year, at the NATO summit in The Hague, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte revealed that Europe and Canada are sending more support to Ukraine than ever before.
What we are seeing at this moment is that European and Canadian partners, they are now basically ramping up the support for Ukraine. Already over 35 billion euros pledged this year. That's even before we reach half year on the 1st of July, and last year it was for the full year a little bit over 50 billion. So we can safely assume that the total amount for 2025 will be higher than in 2024. And this shows you that the support for Ukraine is ongoing.
Rutte also affirmed that NATO, in its entirety, would remain committed to supporting Ukraine and doing whatever was necessary to bring the war to an end and prevent any further attacks or invasion attempts in the future.
Of course, we hope the war will end soon, but if it takes more time, that you have to support in terms of military capabilities, but also when the peace comes or a long-term ceasefire, that you are so strong that Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin will never ever again try to capture 1 square mile/kilometer of Ukraine.
The US too has ramped up support for Ukraine. After a brief but temporary delay in aid, US President Donald Trump confirmed that a huge US aid package was on the way to Kyiv, paid for by NATO allies. The package is set to include all-important Patriot missile system batteries and missiles, among other equipment. Trump also set Putin a clear deadline. Fed up of the Russian president's lies and false promises, on July 14, Trump gave Russia 50 days to agree to a peace deal or face serious consequences in the form of some of the biggest tariffs ever seen. But on July 28, Trump cranked up the pressure and dramatically shortened his deadline. Speaking in Scotland, where he's been playing golf but also meeting with European leaders, Trump said he was disappointed with Putin's actions, especially the continuous bombing of Ukrainian cities and the killing of civilians. The president said,
"I'm going to make a new deadline of about 10 or 12 days from today. There's no reason in waiting. There's no reason in waiting. It's 50 days. I want to be generous, but we just don't see any progress being made."
Trump's original deadline gave Russia until the start of September to strike a deal. Now he wants the Kremlin to act much faster, meaning that by August 10 at the latest, Putin needs to reach some sort of agreement with Kyiv or face the consequences. And Trump is urging his Russian counterpart to do the right thing, saying,
"He's got to make a deal. It's too many people are dying. It's a really bloody war."
Earlier in July, Trump had seemingly grown tired of Putin's games, saying, "We had a deal done 4 times, and then you go home and you see that Russia just attacked a nursing home or something in Kyiv. So what the hell was that all about?" He added, "I'm not so interested in talking anymore," before setting his initial 50-day deadline. At the time, Russia rejected that deadline, with the country's deputy foreign minister, Sergei Ryabkov, saying that any attempts to make demands, especially ultimatums, are unacceptable to us. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, who still has close ties to the Kremlin, also criticized Trump for a theatrical ultimatum and claimed that Russia didn't care about the US president's threats. While Kremlin officials haven't yet commented on the latest ultimatum, Medvedev has once more shared his view on social media, writing, "Each new ultimatum is a threat and a step towards war, not between Russia and Ukraine, but with Trump's own country." It remains to be seen, however, if Putin shares that view, because if the deadline passes and Russia fails to agree to a deal, Trump's next set of tariffs could bring the country's economy to its knees. The White House has revealed that the tariffs would cover all Russian goods, making it much more difficult for the country to conduct international trade. Any countries still doing business with Russia, like those buying and using Russian oil, would also be punished heavily. And that punishment could get even worse if the Sanctioning Russia Act of 2025 can pass into law. A bipartisan bill introduced by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham and Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal, the Sanctioning Russia Act would give President Trump the power to impose tariffs of up to 500% on countries that help or support Russia in any way. Those kinds of tariffs would dramatically impact the economies of those countries and will likely force them to reconsider their Russian investments and seek alternative options. This in turn would weaken Russia's economy even further, and it's already in a perilous position. Putin even had to announce a plan to reduce military spending for 2026 to help stave off an impending recession. The country's national wealth fund is also rapidly diminishing, and Putin may finally look at the mess he's made and realize just how unsustainable it all is. Despite using every tactic he can think of to intensify and strengthen the Russian war machine, Putin must see that he's failing. Gains on the ground are slow and incremental, the big summer offensive is falling flat, and even firing record numbers of drones and missiles at Ukrainian cities and civilian infrastructure isn't yielding the kinds of results the Kremlin wants. In short, Russia is failing, its economy is falling apart, its losses are spiraling, and it's having to resort to increasingly desperate measures to prop up its invasion, like bringing Soviet-era tanks out of retirement and sending squads of soldiers over the border riding motorbikes instead of armoured vehicles. Ukrainian morale isn't breaking. In fact, the country is continuing to demonstrate remarkable resolve and spirit, dinging in key locations, holding its ground, and even striking back in certain areas to recapture lost land and push the Russians back. It's reached a point where many experts agree that winning this war is more or less impossible for Russia, since it would take literal decades of effort and investment. It's utterly unsustainable, and everyone can see it. However, it appears that Putin wants to continue to ignore reality, living in his own fantasy world where the Russian military is some all-powerful, unstoppable force, and he, as its grand and glorious leader, is set to go down in history as a modern-day Peter the Great. Perhaps Trump's upcoming tariffs will be the knockout blow, the final straw that makes Putin face facts and agree to a deal. But if not, then perhaps David Petraeus is right, and a strong, decisive show of force is the only option left, with NATO needing to up the ante once more, delivering the type of game-changing aid that will shift the battlefield in Ukraine's favour on an unprecedented scale. If so, it simply remains to be seen if the alliance members will be willing to take such a big and costly decision. Only time will tell. Now, if you're eager to learn more about the Russia-Ukraine war, check out our recent video detailing how Ukraine yet again defied near impossible odds to take back an occupied village close to the Russian border. Or discover how Ukrainian armed forces are using innovative, almost magical tactics to make their F-16 fighter jets utterly untouchable. And finally, be sure to subscribe to our trusted news channel too, so you can stay informed and up to date on all the latest developments from the front lines and beyond.